the reality is that this is as much about you as it is about anything. We are changed internally, spiritually, when we give money away. There's a story from Jesus's ministry that's probably very familiar to most of you. We're going to talk about it today, and as we do, what I want to do is just point out some things that I notice in the passage that I think will bring to light what we can do to relate to our money differently so that we have every possible advantage to become the kind of person that we want to be. So we're going to be in John chapter 6. And during this time, Jesus' ministry was in pretty full swing. He had been teaching and healing people. And in fact, he had just sent out his disciples in pairs to teach and heal in the surrounding cities. And when they came back, as you can imagine, lots of people now knew about Jesus. And so they began to come in droves. And so we're going to pick up at a spot when there was a large crowd that had gathered and Jesus was healing and teaching as he had been. But what happened in this scenario is that it eventually got later and later in the day. But because the crowd was so eager to hear from Jesus, no one stopped to eat the whole time. Like nobody ditched out to just go grab a bite. Like that didn't happen. And so the disciples say to Jesus, hey, why don't we just take a break, let people go run and get some food? And Jesus says to them, how about we feed them? All right, so this is where we pick up. This is John chapter 6, starting in verse 7. Philip, that's one of his followers, answered him, it would take more than a half a year's wages to buy enough bread for even everybody to have a bite. Another disciple, Andrew, said, here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will that go among so many? And Jesus said, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in that place, and they all sat down. About 5,000 men were there. And Jesus took the loaves, and he gave thanks, and he distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. And he did the same for the fish. Now, I have said this many times when we're looking at a passage together that one of the most challenging things about the Bible is we read a short segment like this, and it's kind of easy to miss the nuance of what's going on. So like in this case, we read these 5 verses, and it's like, all right, there was a big crowd, they were hungry, there was a lunch, they all got fed, the end. And I'm like, wait, stop. Like, can we see what happened? And that's where it gets fun, because what we get to do is we get to look at the Bible and use our spirit-filled imagination and fill in some of the blanks of what must have been happening, because this was miraculous. This was no food to a little bit of food to all the food. And in fact, after this, it says there was even leftovers. So what I want us to do is kind of look at this really specifically and be able to think about what was actually happening. And so we're going to notice a few things, and specifically where I want us to put our attention is on that boy. We don't hear much about him other than this one verse. We'll put it at verse 9. Here's the boy with 5 small barley loaves, 2 small fish, and he says, how far will that go among so many? Like I said, we don't read much about him. In fact, this account is reflected in all 4 of the Gospels. But the other 3 Gospels say even less about this boy. Like, this is all we get. But we're going to do, like I said, we're going to think about what was really happening here, because I think there's so much that we can learn from him. He wasn't giving away his money, but he might as well have been. And what I want us to do is be thinking about what this boy offered, his food, as a parallel to what it takes for us with our money. So let's start. What is the first thing we notice? I noticed this, that this boy had to have a willingness to go without. This kid had to make a choice that he was willing to go without. See, as far as this boy knew, he was never going to see that food again. Like, have you ever thought about that? Like, I don't think that he thought he was going to get his lunch back multiplied. He just offered it. For all intents and purposes, he was just giving away his lunch. I mean, maybe he thought at least maybe Jesus would eat it, like at least the guy in charge would get to have lunch and get to keep going. Maybe at least Jesus would get a meal. For us, when it comes to financially giving, for us to be able to release anything, we've got to make a choice to be willing to go without. Like whatever those funds would have gotten us, can we give that up? Can we go without? Like if you know of a need that maybe $200 would meet that need, but maybe for you this time of year you spend about that much on some new summer clothes, what would it be for you to instead give that money and then be willing to not have the clothes? And just getting really granular here, this is a little bit different than being willing to give something up because you believe that God will provide in a different way. Trusting God to provide when we give, that is really important. It's real and it's significant. We talked about it last week. But what I notice about this boy, it's a little bit different than that, and I think it matters. He was willing to not have what he needed in that moment. He gave away what he had without any inkling that it was going to come back to him. He was willing to stay hungry. And that's a consideration that each of us has to grapple with. I was talking about this with somebody here at Crosswinds. He was telling me that he and his wife became aware of a family in need. The other family didn't go to our church, but he knew that there was a need there. And so they spent some time, he and his wife, praying and thinking and planning about what could they do. And they decided that they wanted to be able to give some money to this family. And the number that they came up with was that they wanted to give them $1,600. Now, what's interesting, and they did, what's interesting is that $1,600 is the same amount that they need every month to pay for their 3-year-old to go to daycare. So for them to be able to give that, it meant that they had to be willing to go without in some other areas so that they could still have enough to pay for the childcare so that they could have enough to give away. Can we give away money and then actually be willing to go without and then to actually go without? It's hard. But if we can get to that place, then something begins to take shape in us. And that something is way more valuable than whatever it is we gave up. Some of the things that start to form in us are things like contentment. Being content with what you do already have. That's a perspective shift. That is a fruit. Another thing that might happen is gratitude. Being thankful for what you do have. What a privilege it is for us to still have all that we have, even when we give something away. I mean, you may not have your new summer wardrobe, but you still have clothes to wear, right? Another thing that gets formed in us when we give money away is selflessness. Because what we're doing is we're practicing putting someone else's needs before our own. And every time we do that, it strips away our focus on ourselves. And that is just how Jesus was. So when we give financially and we have a willingness to go without, something gets formed in us. We grow spiritually. Here's another thing that I notice about this boy. He gave the most that he could, even though it wasn't enough. Can you say wasn't enough with me? It wasn't enough. Yeah, he gave what he could, even though it wasn't enough. This lunch that this boy offered was not enough. One lunch does not equal thousands of lunches. This was a big problem that needed a big solution, and one lunch isn't that. Right in the passage, it talks about what a big problem this was. Here's what Philip said in verse 7. It would take more than a half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to even have a bite. Now, Philip, in fairness, was probably using hyperbole, but he gets his point across. There were so many people that even if they had enough to feed everyone, it is a lot of people to feed. And the plain fact was that this boy's lunch was not enough, but it was everything he had to give. And I think there's something for us in that. When we sort of like hold back from giving, part of it might come from a mindset in us that's like, well, I don't have enough to give that it's really gonna matter. Like the little I have to give won't matter. But there is a real fallacy with this mindset, because the reality is, one, we do know that if many people even give a little bit each, it can make an impact. We know that. I mean, let's just try this. Right here. Will you, when I count to 3, will you clap one time? Ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay. We all heard that. Good job. That was a nice solid clap. Okay. Now we're all going to do it. So on the count of 3, I want everybody here to clap once. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay. Point made. Okay, one thing, even when it's small, when it's together, it really does make a difference. So that is the reality. But there's another fallacy with this mindset that if I can't give a lot, I might as well not give because it's not going to matter. And it's this, that what that does is it assumes that the giving is only about the need, when really it's about you. The reality is that this is as much about you as it is about anything. We're talking about how we are changed internally, spiritually, when we give money away. Now, I realize that this boy didn't actually give money. In fact, it would be likely that this boy didn't have any money on him. Back in that day, money, actual like physical money, was much less prevalent. Their wealth was in their land and their herds and what they could produce. The money that they did have would usually be saved for trading or paying taxes or maybe paying at the temple. So it's clear that this boy didn't have cash, money, but he gave what he could from what he had. Even a small gift can make a big impact when we have decided to sacrifice to give it. When you're giving the most that you can, even when it's small, it makes an impact. So anytime you give to a charity or here to Crosswinds or a person in need, you are impacted. Now, here's the one caveat I would say about this for it to really impact you, is that it does have to be sacrificial to you. And that's different for all of us. Some of you, if you were to give $100, that would be quite costly for you. Others can drop 100 without the blink of an eye. So just forget about the amount. It's not about the amount. It's what feels like it is costing you and that you feel it. For our whole marriage, Chris has been the one who likes to oversee and take care of and mess around with our budget. And it started really early on in our marriage, because what he did was he was the pastor of a church plant that had about 40 people in it. And I was an admin assistant at the local college. In other words, we were broke. And what that meant is that we had to pay attention to like every single dollar. And so he got really good, and then we got really good at knowing kind of how to track our money and be like intentional about it. So recently we switched from this budget tool that we'd been using for a long time to this other app. And in that app, you only get the money for that month. Like you can't say, well, I overspent in this category, so I'm just gonna spend less in July. Like that's not how it works. Like you have to find that money then and cover it. Well, in our family, we have pre-decided that 10% of what we make will come back, and we'll give it back to Crosswinds. And the way that that plays out then in our budget is that other areas have to be less in order for that to stay what we've committed it to be. So for example, what we give to Crosswinds is the same amount as what we spend on food for our whole family for the month. So that is some pain that we feel sometimes. So like a couple months ago, we were toward the end of the month. There was like 3 months left. And this app we use is like a real-time app. It tells you exactly what you have left in real time. So we checked it, and we had $90 left in our food budget for 3 days for 3 people to eat all their meals. And so that night I go into, and you guys know what it costs around here, so I don't have to go into that. But that night I go into the kitchen, and I'm like, all right, we got to work with what we have already. So I open the fridge, and it's like, here are the dinner options, gang. We can have scrambled eggs and toast, and one of you gets the heel. We can have tomato soup, or we can have cereal. So what is it? Now, in fairness, like those 3 meals are really the standard of my cooking ability anyway, so that was fine. But that's not what we wanted to eat. Like what we wanted to do was go to Chili's. That's what we wanted to do. But this is what it is in that moment of feeling like, I wish, I want. Why can't it be different? In that feeling that does not feel good, the redeeming thing is that I know that something is being formed in me. Something spiritual, something much less tangible than food gets formed in us when we are uncomfortable that way, living in that kind of tension. That's how you know when you feel that tension. That's how you know that something is costing you. And when you give away something that costs you, you are spiritually changed. You become more eternally minded, focused on beyond the tangible things. You become less materialistic because you know that at the end of the day, you have to kind of hold it loose. You somehow gain the ability, if you surrender in your finances, you actually gain a stronger ability to surrender in other areas. Greed kind of loses its grip on you a little bit. Joy rises up a little bit more. And you feel less burdened. These are the kind of virtues that get formed in us. That boy with the lunch that day, he was willing to go without. He made a sacrifice. He gave as much as he could, even when he knew it wasn't enough. And then in the kind of story twist that always happens when Jesus is involved, it turns out it was enough. And this is the last thing I want to notice in this passage. Jesus didn't ask anyone else if they had a lunch to share. Has anybody ever thought about that before? I didn't really notice that or think about it until this week. Like if this was me, if I was Jesus, I would have done it much differently. Newsflash, right? Like I feel like it should have been like this boy came and brought his lunch and they're like, whoa, that's a great idea. Who else has something to share? Does anyone have any bread? Maybe some cheese? Is there any bacon out there? They were Jewish, so they wouldn't have asked for bacon, I guess. But basically, let's crowdfund this lunch. It makes so much sense. We'll gather it together, we'll see what we have, and we'll go from there. But that is not what Jesus does. And as much as he was about feeding thousands of people in the crowd, I wonder if Jesus wanted to show that boy what his generosity had done. That kid got an up-close look at Jesus working. The richest man in that crowd did not get that. The smartest woman in the crowd didn't get it. The most charismatic leader in the crowd didn't get it. Even the disciples didn't get to see that. Yes, they all got to be fed, so they did witness a miracle. But this boy, he got to experience God working in a way that no one else did because he was the one that gave away his food. And I'm convinced that must have profoundly impacted that boy. When we're generous to the point of going without, making a sacrifice, we make room for God to work. And when we see God work, it changes us.